And there are a series of cause and effects that wind up psychiatry being the way that it is. The first thing is that psychiatrists worldwide, in order to use the word psychiatrist, they've got to be medical doctors from the get-go. That this is something that's done within medical doctors, or the other possibility would be a psychiatric nurse. But the nurse is a nurse first, and then she becomes a psychiatric nurse. She'll do her Bachelor of Science in nursing, and then do her master's degree in psychiatric nursing, right? And the doctors, they will do their internships and all of their coursework, and then they will specialize in something. You'll have internal medicine, you'll have family medicine, you'll have cardiologist, you'll have sports medicine, and then there is the psychiatry. But the important point about the psychiatry is that they started in the medical model from the beginning, which means the body. All of medical science is medicine for the body, from leukemia to heart disease, and all of it is body oriented. And here the doctors have spent 4, 5, maybe 7 years in medical school learning about the body, and now they're going to do the switcheroo and become psychiatrists, right? Well, guess what? They are grounded in and educated in the body.
Yeah, it's all
So,
about the body, even psychiatry.
right. So you can see that connection. The next point, which is makes it even stronger or even more ground in, is that Sigmund Freud himself was a medical doctor, and that many of his students who were not medical doctors, they really wanted to be medical doctors. In fact, a good example of that is Alexander Lowen, who wound up having to go to Switzerland because that was the only medical school he could get into. So, psychiatry from the beginning has been medicine. 150 years ago, 120, 130 years ago, it started in medicine. And now, no one who is a qualified psychiatrist can do so without having the MD. But this is something that doctors do. You know that, right? I mean, even in your country, that's your
Yeah,
the laws and the universities in your country just copied what was happening in England and the U.S. anyway.
that's what's happening.
Okay, well, here's that becomes to look like an issue then, because the almost entire method of psychiatry has to do with treating the patients the way that a doctor would treat a patient, except that do you can do an x-ray of the skull with the brain, but you cannot do an x-ray of the mind. We don't have that sophistication level. Then, in fact, they're just, you know, like babies in diapers with a new toy, MRIs, functional MRIs, and that kind of stuff, trying to figure out how a normal brain works or what a brain works like, long before they're getting into the detailed differences of individuals. They're not at that level yet. They're still trying to figure out what's an amygdala, what's a hippocampus, um, what's a temporal lobe, etc., like that. So it's still very physically oriented. Well, that's not exactly wrong. The Buddha actually has a great foundation within the body, but he's got all four of the satipatthana: the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mind's objects, to where psychiatry is looking mostly at the body. Now, also, whatever the psychiatrist can do is normally done within the purview of medicine. And normally, what people do when they go to the doctor is they receive some sort of medication. That's the medical model.
Yeah, that's
Medical
why.
model is medicine. I mean, duh. Medical
Exactly.
model is medicine. You get that point, don't you? Yes. Okay. So there was some research done in the 1970s that was well publicized and known, but it didn't make it into the public. And that it was a double-blind study, more or less double-blind, as best they could. But what they were doing is that they were doing uh, four things, and so they had a group of five. Naturally, the placebo group, they're not going to do anything. One group, they worked with exercise. Another group, they worked with group therapy and group dynamics with a psychologist or psychiatrist. The next group was physical contact between one on one, the normal sessions of the psychiatrist with the patient in the office, right? And that either can be psychotherapy or just an office visit like with the doctor. But normally they're looking at it in the sense of the psychological interventions. And then naturally, the last group was taking pills. Now, normally this is done. This research was done with very specific things like clinical depression, and that later they found out that the same thing fit exactly with anxiety because often anxiety and depression are interrelated. And they're interrelated in the following way. If somebody is really uptight and anxious and really, really stressed out because of their anxiety, then the easiest way to handle it is by trying to ignore what's going on, which means that they, in that anxiety, will go into a depression because they're trying to hide from the anxiety. So their outward appearance is that they're in a depression. And you can see almost to the point of being in a catatonic state. But what they don't want to do is they don't want to get up and do some exercise or go someplace or do something that's going to bring all that anxiety back. And so they're hiding from the anxiety. And this is basically the depression. So here's that group. Now, guess what happened in that five pointed double blind study that I was talking about? Who was the most effective? The pill, the one-on-one, the group therapy, or exercise? Which was the most motivating or curative?
Okay, there's the placebo, there's the pill, there's the group therapy, and there's the last
Well,
one.
yeah, the placebo is that they did nothing. But I guess maybe it's a hole in my knowledge. Maybe there was another group that where some of that placebo group got actual placebo pills, to where the other group that we're actually looking at got actually psychotropics,
Mm-hmm.
actual medication. So, of these groups, which of them do you think was the one that had the best outcome?
Well, the result, like right now, the fast result is gonna be the pill. The pill works. Like, oops,
Guess
like man.
what? In this research, that's not the case. People got better through exercise.
Yeah, long-term
Exercise.
exercise is like long-term more healthy, but the pill, like, it really gives you, like right now, I don't know.
Well, let us say that the pill would be a possible substitute. But if you look at it a little bit deeper, it's not actually the exercise itself. It's that when people are exercising, they're breathing well. And because they're breathing well, they're getting the body oxygenated. And because they're getting the body oxygenated, they're getting the brain oxygenated, which means that now they can think a little straighter. That exercise doesn't necessarily just build muscles in the body, it helps breathing, which helps our ability to think, which means that now the people can think their way out of their depression.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important point, but a lot that may not be there in your classes. That exercise and breathing has an enormous benefit.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, like we started a little bit of that, but it's not really our objectives. But like we know stuff, like some stuff of that. Like one mentioned, is like one therapy for like for panic attacks. They do it in some places, I don't know, maybe in Europe or something. They induce the panic attack, and they make people live through the panic attack. And when they go through it, it loses its effect. The panic attack, like, is no more. Interestingly, like the breathing method that like I discovered, the one like I discovered, like I bring the energy up.
Hmm.
Physiologically, it's like going through a panic attack, except it like there's no panic in it at all. Like,
Well,
but
let us
physiologically,
say,
it's the same thing. It's with breathing, and the same thing. Like they induce the panic attack with breathing. Also, like they tell you to breathe through a pipe. Like they have their
hmm,
own methods. So yeah, the breathing really does
exactly.
amazing stuff.
Well, here's something that we can look at about a panic attack. A panic attack actually is when an individual in a particular situation is the situation is inappropriate for the feelings that he's having inside the body. The panic attack, way back when, long before medical science ever happened, long before cities, when we were out in the jungle, a panic attack would happen when we would see the gorilla, the tiger, the snake, or something dangerous, right? The panic attack is actually the preparation for the body for fight or flight. But here we are in a Western, or in a, let us say, the human society that exists today, and fighting and fleeing are not necessarily the appropriate solutions to the situation. But it certainly is the solution to the way that we feel, because the way that we feel is in danger, and so we're ready for the fight or flight. This, in fact, may be why that the research is colored with exercise, because if somebody's having a panic attack, that means that they've got all of this adrenaline in their body and they're not doing anything with it. But if they would go exercise, if they go run, like they were fleeing from something, or if they had boxed with a shadow boxing, or maybe um, what do they call those big heavy things that are circular that the boxers punch on? A punching bag, that's what they call it. All right. So if we did the kind of exercise uh, that would normally be required for a panic attack, then we would deal with that panic attack, because all of the physical effort that is being put in then is breaking down that adrenaline. And so they can relax after that. But if somebody just sits there uptight, the likelihood of them being able to relax is remote, because they're still got a lot of adrenaline in their system.
Yeah, the
But if
body
they
really
work,
affects the mind a lot, like really a lot.
yes, it sure does. The body affects the mind affects the body. And so we have thoughts of danger, the body experiences danger. In other words, we talk ourselves into this is a dangerous situation. We feel danger, the body is prepared for danger, and there's no danger there.
Yeah, and
Other than,
something very interesting, Dhammarato, that the panic attack in itself, the physiologically the panic attack, it doesn't have to be panic, like the word panic. It doesn't have to be. It's just sensations. It's really just sensations, but it's related with the thoughts of dying. Actually, like there are thoughts of dying, thoughts
absolutely
of
all.
fear, and all that. It makes the sensations make it worse, and make it that you think, okay, I'm going to die, and
Mhm.
gets worse, and you cannot handle it. And it's actually the thoughts and the feelings of fear that make the panic attack the panic attack. Without these thoughts and without the fear, it can be actually exciting. I'm sorry to say, but like the sexual stuff, it's
Absolutely.
just sensations. It's like the opposite of the panic attack, but it's associated with excitement, with pleasure. That's why we like it. But at the core of it, it's just sensation. It's just like energy. It's like body, like the blood, and I don't know, whatever stuff going through the body, some pressure. It's the same things, but the thoughts are different. But it's actually the same thing.
Well, what you're talking about now is the distinction then between an effective psychiatrist and an ordinary psychiatrist, because you're beginning to see this stuff that is not really taught in medical school. That they go back to the model of the pill because the pill gives immediate instant relief, but basically the pill is just changing body chemistry. Well, you've already got the mind trying to put the old body chemistry back into place. But if you can see that as a psychiatrist, you have more options to deal with someone. Now, there's also a whole nother world that we can discuss a little bit here, and that's the world that I was in. I was in that world when I worked at the state hospital in South Carolina. I was a psychiatric aide when I was in college without a thought of ever doing that again. And then later, when I was in psychology, I took a practicum at Ypsilanti State Hospital, and there I've got to deal with the same thing again. But then I helped my mom manage the long-term care facility that was normally for old people, but the state of North Carolina started mixing psychiatric patients with the elderly, much to the a lot of problems, including rapes and murders and that kind of stuff. But the state did it that way because that was the cheapest way out for them, they thought, the politicians trying to save money. But that meant that the long-term care facilities now had to deal with psychiatric patients. Luckily, I had been doing that. But the point that I'm wanting to make here is that when people are institutionalized, the psychiatrist, his job is to make the situation palatable both for the staff and the patient. The staff, in fact, an important way of looking at it is that the staff dealing with this guy on a moment by moment, day by day basis is completely different than the psychiatrist seeing him twice a month or once a month, right? Psychiatrists don't, like there's going to be one psychiatrist in the entire mental institution, and you've got 60 patients and maybe 100 staff and only one psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist doesn't see the patients the way that the staff does. And that most often the medication that's given to the patient is not for the patient, it's for the staff. The staff complain about this guy did this or this guy did that, and we need to get him to stop that. And so the doctors are going to then give medication to make life easier for the staff, not to cure this guy. Cures are just not possible in the in this realm of what we call clinical psychology. But there is a new world coming now. That is the world of what they call counseling psychology. Counseling psychology has the perspective of everybody is normal, but everybody could be better off. They can improve their normality. The psychiatric model is these guys are broken, and we've got to deal with their being broken. Maybe we can get them up to normal, but that's unlikely. But to get them cured, forget it. Okay? To where within Dhamma, the whole point is let's do the cure and let's get cured right now. And then later, when we're sick, let's get cured again. And when we're sick later, let's get cured again. Let's get this moment cured.
Yeah, and yeah. And one thing, it's kind of disturbing, and it's a major difference, radical difference between the Dhamma and doing psychiatry. It's about how to say it in English, studying French, the delirium, like hallucinations and people who hear things and see stuff, and like they tell you that they have maybe ideas of persecution, like other people hate them and that kind of stuff. So one major difference, we take these things as like craziness, as not real. But actually in the Dhamma, like what I understand, it's actually real for them. It's real.
Hmm.
And like the patients say that it's real and they totally believe it. They're in their own craziness, but it's actually real for them. It's the creation of their own mind. And that's why psychiatry doesn't
Precisely.
solve the problem, because sees it as something abnormal and like push it back to normal without understanding why these things happen. And it literally, psychiatrists still don't know. Like psychiatrists, they still don't know why these things happen, why these people hear things, why these people like they have fear, like they're afraid of like
Uh-huh.
I don't know ghosts and that stuff. It's actually because of the mind. It's created by their own mind. And I think that if we really investigate, if we put some effort into understanding, or hopefully someone will do that in the future, it's possible that they understand the cause of that. It's probably some bad action. I don't want to tell the patient you're a bad person or something, but actually there's like a bad activity in the mind that's going on that's causing the problem. That's what I think it's going
Hmm.
on.
Well,
I don't know.
guess what? You're it. Okay. You're the one who knows about investigation, so you're the one who can do the investigation. In fact, this may be um, a very good segue for you into becoming a resident psychiatrist. Your
It's
country needs some good psychiatrists, and especially since you've figured this out. Let's go back to that point, though. You have probably heard um, some mystics and wise men mention that life is just a dream.
exactly. That's the radical thing. Like this whole life is like a delusion.
It's a
It's whole,
delusion.
it's the same the delusion that this person is living. It's actually his own reality. That's what's it's like disturbing of it, because I understand that it's real for him. It's real. He's not really
It's
crazy.
real.
For him.
That dream
The
is real
experience
for
is
him.
reality. For him, it's real. It's kind of disturbing, Dhammarato,
Uh-huh.
a little bit.
And so the psychiatrist telling him that it's not real
Well, they don't tell him
is
because
not.
it's useless. It's useless
Yeah,
to tell
because it's
him that.
useless. It's useless. That's the whole point. But there is another method that we can count on. And in fact, this method that I'm about to talk about is as old as the Buddha, but it's not the Buddha's method. It's Socrates' method. What is the Socratic method? Is asking a lot of questions. So the psychiatrist, when he's actually dealing with someone that's having active hallucinations and hearing voices, the right thing for the psychiatrist to do is to go in there and start asking him, that patient, about this. Instead of just saying, oh, he's deluded or oh, he's in a dream state or let's give him some pills and put him back in his room so people can deal with him, the psychiatrist can actually use the Socratic method. And here's how we would do that. Oh, you're hearing a voice. Whose voice is that? I don't know. Well, is it a man or is it a woman's voice? And then he'll think about it. See, he's got to start putting this together. And by asking him a lot of questions, he might be able to put it together that the voice that he's hearing in his head is either his dad or his mom or some policeman way back when or something like that. And now the guy can begin to, it dawns on him that this reality that I'm experiencing is actually coming from within my own mind. But we have to ask a lot of questions. And I give this method to everyone who has to deal with other people, all of my students. For instance, several guys are talking about their daddies. My daddy is always angry. I don't want to deal with my dad. I want to escape from him. And the answer to that is no, go and talk to your dad and ask him questions. How do you feel, Dad? What do you think that's about? And get the dad then to start investigating why he's angry. So you, as a psychiatrist, can use that same method of asking a bunch of questions to get, uh, let us say, into the heads of some of these people that other psychiatrists would just give them some pills and write them off.
Yeah, it's probably very, very hard, Dhammarato, because if it was simple, someone would have done it already. But It's literally there is none. In psychiatry, it has stopped. It didn't go there. I
Okay.
think Carl Jung, he was with Sigmund Freud. I think he was one of the
Jung, yes.
psychiatrists who kind of approached these things a little bit. But I mean, I think that's it. It didn't
Jung,
go that path, like the path of understanding. It did not go
uh-huh.
through that. None
Well,
of that.
Jung worked a lot with what he called archetypes, and that in fact all of the students of Freud did archetypes, that Freud himself was very much into what we call Greek mythology. Now, modern views of Greek mythology is that Greek mythology was a religion. For some people, it was, but for many, many other people, uh, those things were in fact Greek psychology. That they would attribute a particular function of humans and then give that attribute to a god, but actually the attributes of, say, Zeus were attributes that ordinary men would have. The attributes, for instance, of Damocles. You know the story of Damocles, the sword of Damocles? Okay. The sword of Damocles is that Damocles was a king, and he had to sit in judgment on other people. But above the judgment throne was a sword that was suspended by a horse's hair, which meant any time that he sat in that judgment seat, he was in grave danger of having that sword fall upon him and split him open head head first. Okay, that's the sword of Damocles. Now, a lot of people can think of that as just that we're always in that seat, which means that things feel dangerous all the time. At any point in time, that sword could fall upon me. And a lot of people go around living their lives as if there's a sword hanging over their heads. But there's a little bit more to that story of Damocles, and that is the sense that no, that sword is not over his head wherever he goes. It's only over his head when he's sitting in judgment of other people. When he's actually being the judge, when he's being the king and trying to straighten out problems, that's when it's most dangerous. And so another way of looking at it is that the sword of Damocles over our own head only was there when we're sitting in our own judgment seat. So this is an example. Sisyphus and the Rolling Stone and all of these kind of things, Narcissus and the story of Narcissus that fell in love with his own
Image.
image in the pond and
The
all of that. Right. Okay. So you can see, in fact, that modern day psychiatry is built upon Greek mythology, and that Greek mythology was the really really strong point for uh, Jung. And because of Carl Jung's understanding of this Greek mythology and everything, is where he came up with these archetypes. In other words, there's overarching types of ways of thinking. And sometimes you're in one archetype, and sometimes you're in another archetype. Sometimes we're Sisyphus, sometimes we're Damocles, sometimes we're Narcissus.
Yeah, actually, to bring this subject, there's the disease. It's called identity, like troubles, identity issues, like people who get a thing like possession, like they think that they have different personalities, that kind of stuff. These people, they don't understand that personality is created. Like they're not that this personality or the other personality. It's actually the one that's behind, but it's I mean, these people, you cannot deal with them. How can you deal with those people? They literally, they're so engrossed in this type of personality. It's like the mind gets fractured. Like, I don't know how these things happen, really. It's
All
a
right.
little bit interesting to understand them. It's not easy. It's not simple to understand these things. It's like for me, it's like the mind, like it gets fractured because they're so rigid, it gets broken, and this personality goes like this, and this one goes like that, and I don't know, maybe.
Okay. Do you, in your studies in psychiatry, do you have any practicums? Do you actually get a chance to deal with real patients?
Well, yeah, I'm going after a
Okay.
while. I'm going.
Great. Absolutely great. So let's talk about that for a moment. I would like to introduce Bander and Grinder and NLP. Have you heard of NLP, Neuro Linguistic
Yeah.
Programming? Okay, you've heard of it. Great. All right. In there, Bander and Grinder rediscover what the Buddha knew about all along. In fact, the Buddha was quite skilled at this. Let me tell you about what we're talking about. Now that we know these archetypes, the way to do it is to understand which particular archetype this particular patient is dealing with right now. That's actually the easiest part of the job. In other words, find out how he's feeling. Look at how he's feeling. You can normally tell, and he'll describe how he's feeling. He's either frozen, or he's agitated, or he's angry, or he's remorseful. Whatever that is,
No,
you
the
can see
Maharaja,
that.
like the identity problem is like completely radical. It's not I'm agitated. No, it's like completely different person. It's like you are Dhammarato, and in the next, I don't know, few hours, in the next month or whatever, another personality, like maybe your friend, it
Yes.
completely, it's not
All
me,
right.
like completely changes.
Okay. Right.
Completely.
And the psychiatrist gets confused because this day or this hour, this guy is this way, and the next hour or the next day, he's like this.
No, it's not
Okay.
about me. It's like about the patient. The patient is experiencing that. Like how to deal with
Right.
that. You can't.
Okay. That's the whole point is that let's not think about what that patient was doing yesterday. Let's think about how he's behaving right now, knowing that he's going to change. That sometimes he's going to be Damocles, sometimes he's going to be Narcissus, sometimes he's going to be Sisyphus, sometimes he's going to be something else. But the question is, for the psychiatrist, going back to NLP, the issue that we're talking about is pacing and leading. In other words, whatever the patient is feeling, the job of the psychiatrist is to join him there. Yes, I understand. In other words, part of the asking of the questions is to build rapport inside of the craziness. The job of the psychiatrist is to develop, number one, trust, and along with that, friendship. If you don't have friendship and trust with the client, all you can do is give him pills. But if you can develop trust and friendship, then we can get someplace. In other words, we have to go into the crazy world and make some friends there. And once we establish that friendship, now we can begin to invite the guy out. Let us do it. Probably the most severe issue would be someone who is in a paranoid catatonic state. Do you know what I mean by catatonia?
No.
Okay. Basically, their paranoia is so strong that they are frozen in fear. It's the freeze. Except that sometimes people will get into that freeze state and stay in it. They don't eat, they won't sleep, they just sit there, and the psychiatrists get freaked out because these guys are just stuck in a state. Well, guess what? This guy who's stuck in that state, perhaps he's actually responding to everybody in the facility is freaked out about him. Right? So, what Bander and Grinder did with this one patient, this was actually at Ypsilanti State Hospital. This guy was catatonic, and they walked in both Bandler and Grinder, and that one of them sort of stayed out of the way. He was there monitoring and looking at what was going on, but he kind of took the pose. But the other one actually sat directly in across from the guy, so that the guy in the catatonic state, even though he wasn't looking like he was paying any attention to anyone, he still had his eyes open. And so the therapist positioned himself in the field of vision of the guy who's in the catatonic state, and then assumed the pose of the guy who was in the catatonic state. And just sat there in that frozen state, like the guy who was in the catatonic state. And he built rapport with him in the sense that everybody, or both these guys, were watching the catatonic, and the catatonic became curious. Why is this guy just sitting here? You see, everybody else in the facility had been freaked out about him not moving. These guys went in and started acting just like he did. They built rapport. That made him curious. What's this guy doing just sitting here? And so he began to open his eyes and lift up and start to look around. And so the therapist started to look around too. In other words, he's mimicking him, but not miming him exactly. So if the catatonic does move, let's say something slight, like turn his hand over, then what the therapist will do with that same hand will move it in a different way, but he'll mimic the fact that the guy moved his hand, but he's not going to mimic it exactly. He's going to do something a little bit different. So if the catatonic moves his hand from palm down to palm up, then the therapist is going to take that same hand and scratch himself or do something, and then put the hand back down the way that the hand was, the way that the catatonic put it. In other words, when the catatonic moved his hand from upside down to right side up, the therapist doesn't do that. He makes an intermediate movement, but he winds up back to the same place that the guy was, so that he makes sure that the guy doesn't think that he's being bamboozled or mimed or tricked or made fun of, but rather here's this guy just sitting there. Okay. After about 20 minutes of these slight little gestures and whatnot like that, the two therapists figured out that this was the time to try it. Now, this is back in the old days where people smoked cigarettes a lot. And they had already determined that this guy was a smoker in most cases anyway. And here he had been in this catatonic state now for several weeks without a tobacco. And so what happened was that the therapist looked over to the other guy and says, "Can I have a cigarette?" And the guy pulls out a cigarette, pops it up, and gives it to the therapist and lights it up. And then the other guy hands the pack with the open cigarette to the catatonic. And guess what the catatonic does? He takes a cigarette. They broke him out of that catatonic state that he had been in for about 2 weeks by pacing him first. Now, this is an extreme example, but what we can do when you are dealing with someone that you can, if they come in and are completely unresponsive, don't try to get them to respond. You just get into that same place and build some rapport, even though that is completely quiet. You don't have to say anything. You just assume more or less the same posture that the person is doing, so that we could build rapport, get him to trust you. It may, in fact, take 2 or 3 sessions where nothing much is ever said, because it's much more important for the psychiatrist to be trusted by this guy. Because if we could get him to trust us and make friends with him, then he'll be much more responsive to wholesome behaviors.
Yeah.
Anyone who is a psychiatric patient is not 100% nuts all the time.
Yeah, like we got different cases, but like the crazy people, sometimes they can be a little bit disturbing.
Uh-huh. That, in fact, one of the things that many of the psychiatric patients want to do is to convince the doctor that they're not crazy.
Well, the real crazy people, they don't care, Dhammarato. Like they don't care if you believe them or not. It's their own
If they want
reality.
out,
They totally
if
believe
they
it.
want out, if they
Yeah.
want out of the institution, if they're institutionalized and they want out of that institution, then they will try to convince the psychiatrist that they're not crazy.
Well, I still haven't seen that yet, but
All
yeah.
right. Well,
Generally
here's a
speaking,
case.
like they're totally convinced. Like they don't care what other people think. They're just
Okay.
chilling their own craziness.
All right.
They're
Here's a case where that would be true. And where it's true, for instance, in the United States, and I'm not sure about your country, but in the United States, one of the defenses is insanity. Oh, I killed my mother, but I was crazy. Do not execute me. Put me in a mental institution, is basically what the lawyers are saying. And so that guy who has done a crime and then gets put into a mental institution, he begins to figure out that prison may be better. Prison may be better than this psychiatric institution. And so they will try to convince the doctors to let them out. So you haven't run across that. Others are, uh, they call it affect. What kind of affect does the patient have? In other words, is he willing to engage with the psychiatrist, or is he really off in his own world? Like
yeah,
the
they're all
catatonic, he was really off in his own world. So these are the two extremes. One is off in his own world, and the other one is really trying to convince the psychiatrist he's not crazy.
and the symptoms they generally go like, well, he's living in this reality, but with the pills, with the medicine, he goes back and he can dissociate himself from these thoughts that he had and these like ideas that he had and these things. With the pills, he can dissociate himself and he can see, okay, maybe that was not real, maybe it was not right, and then he can like go back to
If
this
he's
reality
asking those
like that.
kind of questions, that's why it's important for the psychiatrist to ask questions, is to get them to look at that. Um, so uh, this is kind of a way of looking at it is that some people are off in their world, and that if they are, then the psychiatrist does not deal with them in this world. The psychiatrist has to go into their world for a while so that we can build rapport inside that world. And a way to do that is asking them a lot of questions. Oh, you're hearing voices. Tell me about the voices. Who is it that you're hearing? Not that the voices are bad or that you're having a delusion or there's nobody there, but give them credit for their reality. And so you ask them about your questions. The questions that you ask, especially if they're skilled, as you're asking skilled questions, that will help him to figure out that what those voices are just old memories. They're not real. But he'll have to figure that out for himself. You can't tell him, not the psychiatrist. That's the problem with the psychiatrist. That's why they don't bother to try to tell him anything. It's because they know he's not going to hear it. The question is how can you help him to see it for himself? And the
Well,
answer to that is by asking a lot of questions.
Mhm. Well, Dhammarato, how do you think we can apply that to ourselves, like in the practice? Because we engage in the world with the senses, and how accurate are the senses? How real is? Can we figure out? Like we cannot figure out a lot by the senses,
Okay.
but that's all what we have. That's what we experience, just the
Your
senses and
your
thoughts.
question now is precisely the teaching that we've talked about before, Paticca Samuppada. So let me see if I can answer that question this way. All right. There is a real world. the real world that we can touch, that we can see, that we can taste, that we can feel. There is a reality there. However, in order to make sense out of that reality, we have to compare it to something that the information that we've already got. In other words, if I look at that thing out there and I call it a tree, I call it a tree because I know already what trees are, and that one fits my description of a tree, right? Well, that's easy enough, but there's the other kind of understanding, and that is that when I see the tree, that's just with the eyes. But there's another kind of seeing, and I would say that in the sense of, oh, I see what you mean, which means that now we're understanding a concept as a concept. However, this is the point when things can get really dangerous, because when we build that concept out of our past plus the present, the concept often now is not exactly real. It's got emotions, or it's got old memories, or it's got, for instance, if there is any racism in one's past, then when they see someone that's not the right color, that racism will come up, and they're dealing with that person as if he's something else, instead of paying attention to what's really going on in the moment. What's really going on in the moment is that, for instance, that white man or that black man may really be a really good guy for you to learn to know. But because he's black, or because he's white, or some other color, we automatically assume that he's something that I don't want to have anything to do with. Okay, so this is how that's colored. We color our own understanding of reality. Everyone does this, whether they're hospitalized in a mental institution, whether they're out on the streets running crazy and everybody knows they're crazy, or whether they're out on the streets running crazy, but their craziness is just like everybody else's craziness, and so they're assumed to be normal. The only difference between what is crazy and not crazy is basically what is normal and not normal. But it's all, many times, just crazy, not wise. So what that means is that when we see something in the reality of the moment, we make something of it. We literally make something of it. One of the things that we can do is to see something more important than it actually is. We can see it in one context because we've seen it in that context before, but now in the reality of this moment, it's in a different context, but we can't see that because we see it in this old context. Okay, so an example of that would be a soldier who has been in war, let us say in Afghanistan, and he's home, and he's laying in bed asleep, and his 5-year-old son jumps on him while he's asleep.
Yeah, PTSD, he gets a lot of...
and PTSD, exactly. And so his self-preservation instinct that's coming from that war is like he's going to be choking his son before he even wakes up to recognize that this is his son.
Mm-hmm.
This has happened. I mean, this is not an unusual thing. This happens a lot, that we get emotionally attached. We could also go so far as to say that everybody suffers under post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, exactly. But in small doses. That's what I noticed, because it's like a small PTSD, and then it's a small PTSD. Maybe I get like a bad result from this bad thing. There's a small PTSD that tells me, okay, get away with it from that, like avoid it, maybe, I don't know, dodge it or something like that. Yeah, this is something that I really noticed. Small PTSDs. But when it gets to the threshold that it threatens your normal life, then it's diagnosed, and then it's
Guess
treated.
What you're talking about threatens your normal life means that now everybody in town can see it. The actuality of it was that it was threatening normal life before anybody could see it. he was still in suffering. Just like each one of us is in suffering until we wake up and see it. And then we have a choice to change it. So some people will be doing bad behavior, but because that behavior is acceptable in this society, he's not seen as crazy. But if he does some other behavior that's unacceptable, but now it's now not just wrong behavior, but it is a social faux pas. Now people begin to point at him and says, that guy's crazy. So now that we know that the craziness is more of an observation than it is an internal reality, the internal reality is that we're all more than likely going to be living in a dream state, which means that our understanding of reality doesn't actually match reality. This is why the investigation is so important. Instead of looking at one thing one time and say, oh, I know what that is, we need to say, no, I don't know what it is. Let's keep looking. Let's keep investigating it. And so this is when we keep investigating it, that's when we begin to really pay attention to what's going on, and then we can begin to see the subtleties of our own dukkha. So that point about Paticca Samuppada is that consciousness of the sensory input is then processed. One of in the Pali, the processing is called Dhammarato, which means we take the rupa on the outside and we put it into the brain. We name it. We bring that object out of reality and put it into the mind. By doing so, that's a dream, because the reality is that it's real out there. The fact that we put it into the mind is the dream. And so everything winds up being a dream. The question is, do you know that this is a dream? And you need to keep looking at reality. To keep checking it out, keep checking it out, keep checking it out, instead of assuming that we know. Because the assuming that we know is the dream. That's the dreaming. And we all do this, and psychiatric patients do it also. Everybody does this. But the Dhamma dude knows he's doing it. And because he knows he's doing it, he has a choice. Which means then that the psychiatrist has a duty, in a way, of asking the kind of questions to the patient to get the patient to look at what he's doing. Our questions are pointed and directed in the sense of, what do you feel? What kind of thoughts do you have associated with that? Etc. like that. So we begin to pay attention to and get the guy that we're working with that way. Now, this could be done in the psychiatric doctor-patient relationship, but it can be done at home. You can do this with your mom also. You don't have to play psychiatrist, but what you can is get mom to look at how she feels by asking her about it. So when dad is really, really angry, we can ask him, hey, Dad, how come you're so angry? What's got to you? What happened at work today? You know, and start asking him questions like that. And get him to take a look at it.
Yeah, that's one practical advice.
That's very practical advice, is asking people questions. Whether you're the psychiatrist with a patient, or whether you're out there dealing with your family or dealing with other psychiatrists or everything like that. Because we're all nuts. We are all crazy. We are all psychiatric cases.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're living through.
We are all living in a dream, a self-constructed dream state. And the question is, how close does the dream that we're in match with actual reality? This is one of the definitions then of dukkha. Dukkha is the distance between reality and what we make of it in our dream. So if your dream is very close to reality, there's very little dukkha. If your dream state is spot on with reality, then there's no dukkha. But if your dream is way far away from what's happening, then more than likely there's going to be some calamity in there, some dukkha, some problem, some missed opportunity. An example of that is that you see the target here, but you think the target's over here. And so when you're shooting, you shoot there because that's where you think the target is and you keep missing it. But if you investigate and investigate, you can say, wait a minute, I thought the target was over here and I keep shooting over there, but I see that it's not there. Let me adjust my scope. Let me adjust my sights. Let me see where that hand really is, and then I can hit it directly. This is why investigation is so important, and it doesn't matter whether you're in a psychiatric institution or whether you're in home or whether you're in a classroom or whether you're on your own in private practice. That investigation, investigation, and investigation is what we need to do. And we know that in our own case, but other people don't know that. And so how we get them to investigate is by asking them questions, inviting them to investigate what's happening inside their own mind.
Okay. Okay.
That's fairly simple, isn't it? And if you do that, it will revolutionize how you deal as a psychiatrist with mental patients. Because most I know I've been in that place before. I've been the administrator of a facility. And we get the idea that we know what's wrong with that guy. We know what he needs to take. We know what to do with him. That's the wrong approach. Absolutely the wrong approach. We have to stop thinking that we know what's good for him and ask him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the advice, Dhammarato. I really appreciate it. Well,
Okay.
that's all my questions.
Yeah, go back into your psychiatric studies with this understanding that we have to take that approach. That if you ask, people will do the investigation, and then they can begin to figure out why they do things the way that they do, and they can also see that when I'm doing that, it's not wholesome, and I can make a change. So you could actually teach people Anapanasati without ever mentioning it or the Buddha or anything like that. You're just asking questions.
Okay. Okay. I think this sums it up. I don't know if you have another advice. I think that's it. All right. Okay. So
I want to hear it when you
Dhammarato.
actually get a practicum. I want to hear it when you actually get a practicum.
Yeah, I hope
You
so.
actually start dealing with patients rather than just classroom.
Yeah, well, it's still far in the future. Like we have contact with the patients, but it's kind of limited, and it depends on which teacher we have. There are teachers that allow us to actually interact with the patients, and teachers that tell us don't go. And there are patients that are aggressive, and there are patients who can you actually talk with them. So it depends a lot on the circumstances.
You can actually start the rapport that we're talking about before you ever get a chance. If you're already in there, in other words, if there is a head psychiatrist and 5 or 6 student psychiatrists following them around on the ward, you can take an opportunity to begin to catch the attention of some of the patients there and smile at them. Just smile at people.
Okay.
Let them know
Well, it
that
can be
you're a
dangerous
friendly
out there.
case.
It can be really dangerous because there are some ones who are really aggressive, but yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe I'll
But
tell
you're
you.
doing it when you're with 4 or 5 other psychiatrists. So if you smile at somebody and that ticks them off, you've got 5 psychiatrists right there to deal with it. And you'll know to leave that guy alone next time.
Okay. Okay, then. Okay. Thanks again. Thank you. I'll see you soon. I think. Yeah.
All right, that's great.
Okay.
I really am pleased. Yes, I'm glad that you're taking your psychiatric stuff now.
Yeah. Well,
That would be great. You're going to make a great psychiatrist, I can tell.
well, I hope so. Still in the future.
I
though.
know it. I don't have to hope.
Okay.
I can see it.
Okay. Well, see you next time, probably on Sunday.
All right. Yes, I would like to see you on Sunday. That would be great.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
See you later.
See you.